We have Dan Ocampo on, and he is from the NELP here to talk about this ruling on the on the DOL rule. Dan, thank you for joining. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you both.
How are you, Dan?
I'm well.
Good,
How
good.
about you guys?
I'm gonna. Am I gonna wear my Uber shirt and Lyft hat on March 11th? What's happening? So, a lot of people, are confused. There's a lot of information out there, and most of it is incorrect, I'm pretty sure. And we want to know. I mean, you're the man. So first, introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Great. So I'm Dan Ocampo. I am an attorney at the National Employment Law Project, NELP. And I work on a lot of these issues and work with a lot of groups of driver and delivery driver and rideshare driver drivers who are organizing and work on policy campaigns at the state level and some of this stuff at the federal level as well. So I wanted to come on and talk a little bit about this rule that was published last week by the US DOL and really focus on what it does do and what it doesn't do, because as you said, Sergio, there has been a good amount of sort of, I think, misinformation circling around. So what this rule is about is who is eligible for rights and protections under one federal statute, which is the 1935 Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the federal law that sets a minimum wage, federal minimum wage, and overtime protections. And so what this rule does is it makes some modifications to the legal test for determining who is an employee covered and eligible for overtime for minimum wage, and who is an independent contractor that is not covered. And really those modifications are a restoration of the law as it used to be a few years ago before the Trump administration's rule on this issue.
Right.
So what it doesn't do is it doesn't affect in any way directly rights and protections under other federal statutes, which is to say the right to organize, unionize under the National Labor Relations Act, health and safety protections under the OSHA Act, nor does it directly affect anything under state law, workers' comp, paid leave, unemployment insurance, or any state minimum wages, which tend to be much higher, or in many states are much higher than federal minimum wage. So it doesn't really directly affect any of those things. All it does is determine who is a worker eligible for federal minimum wage and overtime.
Yeah. So let's make sure that people understand this is a federal ruling, right? And just like Dan just said, federal minimum wage. You all know what the federal minimum wage is. $7, $7.25. Is that something like that?
$7.25. Yeah.
So all of you, our community is 99.9% drivers. So if you're not making $7.25 per hour, I think you're in the wrong business. I think it's time to go flip some burgers. So that's why I think these companies responded in a way that, I don't think it's going to make a difference. We're going to run business as usual, right? So let's talk a little bit about the 6 guidelines or 6 items in this ruling, one by one, and which one sounds like we may actually be an employee and which one doesn't sound like we may actually be an employee.
Yeah. And let me just say quickly that, federal minimum wage is pathetically low. It hasn't been raised in 15 years, since 2008. Hasn't been adjusted for inflation, which is why it's so low. But, I think if you want to take a positive view of this kind of rule, the basic idea is that, rideshare drivers, delivery drivers are workers who should be guaranteed some kind of pay floor at the federal level, at the state level, some kind of pay floor. And although this pay floor is pretty low, it's something. And then, of course, you add in overtime protections, which, I can go into in more detail a little later, but which can be meaningful for workers who are working 40 hours a week or more than 8 hours a day. But just to answer your question, so the way this rule sets out the legal test, it is as you said, it's a 335-page document. It's really long. And a lot of that is going through this legal test in pretty exhaustive detail. But basically, it asks one fundamental question, which is the worker in business for themselves, truly in business for themselves as an independent contractor, or are they dependent on the business of another? Are they dependent on an employer for that business? That's the question that it's trying to ask. And it goes through 6 different factors to try and get at that question.
Well, according to that question, usually the question that was asked is the driver in our case in business for themselves? Yes. And the other one is it controlled by the employer? Or, I mean, yes. Right. I mean, I can't do without Uber, right? Without Uber sending me clients, but I am in business for myself. So let's talk a little bit about those 6 points under that.
I think you touch on exactly the tension that runs through this, and
Yeah.
and it's difficult to figure out. So the 6 factors. The first one is opportunity for profit or loss. So true independent contractors should have the opportunity to increase their profit or to make a loss. And that should come from something other than by just working more hours or taking more jobs, but by some kind of managerial skill, they can increase their profit. That's a basic feature. So that's the first of these factors. The second is investments. Is the worker making capital investments into building their businesses, investments that are comparable in some way to the investments the employer is making? And that's not just tools of the trade that things that you need to buy in order to do the job, but actual capital investments to grow your business. So marketing, things like that. The third factor is the degree of permanence. So is the relationship between the worker and the employer like a long-term, continuous, indefinite relationship, or is it project-based, sporadic, and non-exclusive? So if you think here about like a plumber who comes to fix your sink, and then maybe your shower 6 months later, that looks like an independent contractor. It's sporadic and project-based, as opposed to a janitor who cleans the same office building every day. They look much more like an employee under this factor.
Yeah.
The fourth, which you previewed, is the nature and degree of control. So does the potential employer control the conditions of work? And some of the conditions that they look to, it's like scheduling, which we know a lot about, but supervision, price setting, and the ability to work for others. So it's sort of asking the question, like, are you setting your own prices? Are you determining what good or service to sell? Can you hire other people? Are you determining who you enter contracts with? Those are the kinds of questions in determining whether the worker is controlling their own conditions of work or whether they're being controlled by an employer. So if you think about like freelance journalists, I know this is a big issue. Freelance writers who don't want to be covered. If they're working whenever they want, without basically any supervision and setting their own prices, and writing for whoever they want, under this fact, they would pretty clearly be, I think, true independent contractors in business for themselves.
Yeah.
The fifth factor is asking whether the work performed by the worker is critical, necessary, or central to the employer's principal business. So, I mean, in this case, it's pretty difficult to deny. Uber's central business is taxi rides, so the work performed is pretty.
No, they're software companies. They're not.
Yeah, that's really a stupid argument that I've had them make. But yeah, if you think about a pizza shop, like an electrician who fixes something at a pizza shop is an integral to the principal business of making and selling pizzas. But the pizza cooks or the delivery workers are central to that business. Yeah. So that's the fifth. And the sixth and final factor is skill and initiative. So does the worker possess specialized skills that they are using to build a business? So, you think about security guards and call center workers who may not usually have specialized skills, but freelance journalists, freelance writers, pretty clearly have a specialized skill they're bringing to this that they're using to build a business. So that's the sort of the overview of what the legal test is. And a court or an agency would go through those 6 factors and would kind of see how they weigh out, and then would make a determination based on the totality of the circumstances, based on everything that has come forward, whether the worker is truly in business for themselves or dependent on another for business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm in California, so I lived through AB5 and Proposition 22, which I'm living with Proposition 22 now. Under the AB5, the ABC test, right? It had 3 factors, but then in these 6 factors, does one weigh more than the other? Does one take precedence like it did with the AB5 situation? Or it's just basically, because to me, from what you said, out of the 6 points, Daniel, I think 3 pretty much apply to the rideshare driver. 3 probably not. So how does that decision going to be made? Like, if I believe 3 have definitely applied to a rideshare driver. So how does that decision going to come around?
I mean, I think it's I don't want to speculate too much. It's difficult to say as you say it. Like, you can see reasonable decision makers coming down differently on different of these factors, but clearly several of them suggest that under the current business model that Uber, Lyft, Doordash, et cetera have, their workers are being treated more as employees than as true independent contractors who are in business for themselves. And it's totally possible that, you know, in an agency determination or in a court ruling applying this test, that's what they would conclude. There's no single factor that's more important than any other. It's really just like, this is sort of a guideline for going through this test. So it's difficult to predict. It is quite different than the ABC test, which is what was used in '85. It has been applies under Massachusetts state law and in some other places. And that's because that test starts from a presumption of employment status that the employer then has to disprove. And they can only disprove that by showing each of three factors, the A, the B, and the C. And if they can't show any of those, then they lose and the worker is an employee. So that was a sort of a stricter and less flexible test than this one.
Right. So now I understand why these companies are not panicking and why their stocks did not tank when this ruling came out, unlike it did last September, when the rumors were around that, the ruling is going to come out and we may all be wearing, Uber shirts and Lyft hats. But then this time around, it didn't work out that way, because to me, from what you're explaining now, I don't think they have much to worry about. But, I mean, look, we're a 99.9% rideshare driver-centric channel. And we do run our polls and surveys. And, we did run one. We're going to talk about it once you leave. But let's talk quickly about that. I mean, we ran the poll. 85% of our viewers want to stay independent contractors. That's pretty overwhelming. And so my question to you is, do we have to worry about being employees under this rule, period? Or where do you see this going? What do you see? Look, March 11th is only a couple of months away. So where do you see this process going? Do you see this as legal battles raging for a while? What do you think? What is your prognosis?
Well, maybe just to take what you said at the beginning there, I saw the poll that you put on your website, and it's interesting. And, that a lot of rideshare drivers, delivery drivers would prefer to be independent contractors, but that they also feel that they're not being treated as true independent contractors currently.
Very true.
But I guess my sort of response to that is that I don't think that it's really the right question to ask, whether drivers want to be independent contractors or employees, nor is it really the question that this rule is trying to ask. What it's asking is, do some subset of workers, including rideshare drivers, delivery drivers, should they be entitled to a federal minimum wage and overtime if they're not currently receiving it? That's the question it's asking. And in order to get there, you have to make this determination under law to apply this statute. But that's really the question that this is asking. And as you said, it's $7.25 an hour. And then for hours worked over 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week, it's $10.80 or 1.5 times whatever the hourly wage is. So really the companies should only be worried if they are regularly paying workers under the federal minimum wage, or not paying, or not paying under that overtime wage rate as well. So that's the only reason I think they should be worried. And I would hope, as you say, that that's not regularly happening, and certainly under this rule that it shouldn't. In terms of what to expect, so you said the effective date of the rule is March 11th. So that's when it goes into effect. Totally possible that will be delayed. There are legal challenges that are already underway from industry groups that are suing the Department of Labor, saying they don't have the power to do this, or whatever arguments they're making. That I don't think will ultimately be successful sort of on the merits, but may be successful at throwing sand in the gears and slowing down the actual rollout of the rule. But even then, when the rule goes into effect, nothing is going to change immediately. It's not self-executing, so it requires DOL to actually enforce. So it has to go after specific employers that it believes are misclassifying its workers and paying under the minimum wage or not paying overtime, and bring a case against them and litigate that to resolution before anything will change in any specific industry or with any specific set of workers. So again, I think the timeline for this is a little longer than just March 11th. Okay,
and as far as obviously we talked about a timeline, we talked about the 6 points that involves the companies, and this seems like pretty loose ruling actually to me. I mean, If they wanted to squeeze these companies, they probably could have squeezed these companies a lot more. But I think part of it is because there is no Department of Labor secretary out there. There's Julie Su out there who's like a nominee. She hasn't been voted in yet, and even her own party doesn't want that. But I mean, look, that's a political thing. So okay, so for our audience and watching later, calm down. You're not going to be wearing Uber hats and Lyft shirts. Don't worry about it. Not at the moment, anyway. I'll give you the floor for the last few minutes. Give our audience some advice. Give us, you do organize. Obviously, you help organize communities, driver communities, or worker communities out there. And I personally think, okay, and next week we're going to have Malda on, Minnesota Uber Lyft Drivers Association President Eid Ali, and hopefully Senator Fatah, who's supporting that. I think our fight has to be, look, I love the Seattle model. Chris loves the Seattle model and Washington State model. I think it's really, we can duplicate that city by city, state by state. What do you think about a proposition like that, as opposed to, everybody under one umbrella in a federal ruling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Molda and what they're doing, and Eid and Senator Fatah, and there's a bunch of different groups in different states and cities, as you say, doing similar things. And we have a really good set of minimum pay standards in Seattle, at the state level in Washington, in New York City for rideshare drivers, and then a separate one for food delivery workers that just went into effect. And legislation moving in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Colorado, DC, a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
And I'm totally supportive of those efforts, and NELP is involved in those. And I think the basic principle is just that rideshare drivers and delivery drivers obviously are being underpaid right now, and should be entitled to some kind of pay for. I think the model in Seattle and New York City is a really good one, and I think should be replicated. And it creates a really robust minimum pay standard. But I don't think there's anything to be scared of having a federal minimum wage that sits beneath that. It's just that the current federal minimum wage is so low, and has been so low, that it's a little less meaningful right now.
Okay.
But
if our audience has some questions for you on the side, because chat's flying, I'm not paying any attention, but I'm sure people are asking questions. How do they reach out to you? If how do they reach out to the NELP?
You can look up our website, but you can also totally reach out to me by email. I can drop my email maybe in the chat somewhere.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go. You can drop it in the chat
for sure.
But what we'll do is we'll also put it in the show notes when the live is over. Look, people, this is an important question, and hopefully we answered all your questions. So don't worry, you're not going to become employees yet, unless you want to be. Unless you're in the 15% who wants to become employees. I mean, look, 15% said they want to become employees. I mean, I certainly don't. I don't think Chris does. I want to stay independent contractor.
You know what? I've been pondering this, and I want to know what a rideshare employee would look like. What would that actually look like? Because that's the thing. Nobody knows what you're basing an employee off of. What we know as a McDonald's worker or something like that. Probably scheduling, those types of things. But the reality is, what if it wasn't like that? What if it was something different? I'd just want to see what it would be like, and then I can make my decision based on that. Because the problem is, what the model is currently as quote unquote independent contractor, but the reality is they're trying to do what they can in order to subvert that as much as they can by having the most control over you. And yes, it probably does falter over the full territory of being an employee versus an independent contractor. But the reality is, what would a true employee model look like as a rideshare driver or food delivery worker? What would that really look like comparatively to, something that we see at a day in, day out job, 9 to 5, something like that? I'm sure it's probably going to be different. That's why I want to know now, because then that way we can base our decisions much better on what would be better.
We have had that in New York City when the TLC pushed the ruling, and they said you can't log on anytime you want anymore. You're just I'm going to give you a schedule, and just like an employee, you come in at a certain hour, you can log in. And now they're doing it with the delivery workers in New York City. They're going like, look, I think my thing is, because it's an app-based system, it's so new, only a decade old. I think it's going to be like, okay, you take every order, you're active pretty much all 60 minutes. You take every order. You're getting paid a minimum wage in New York City now for couriers is $26 or whatever it is per active hour. You take every order, $2, $5, $10. It doesn't make a difference. You get tips, great. If you don't, no big deal. But you're going to live with this, and I think that's what the model is going to. Same for RideShare, Chris. I think you're going to take every trip, just like I did this weekend. Take every trip. That's it. And if you don't make it, we'll top it off for you, and you get the difference. What do you think, Dan?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I forget exactly how it works, but I believe that Revel, I don't know if you've had anybody on for Revel, you know how Revel works, but I believe
we're going to have the CEO on actually in probably next month, yeah.
Because that's a sort of an EV-focused rideshare company that definitely exists in New York, and I believe that they have drivers who are employed as employees. So I think, maybe that's the answer to your question, what that actually looks like. And on the delivery side, I know that in New York as well, Relay, which is one of the food delivery apps that doesn't have a consumer-facing side, has scheduled shifts, and I think it's sort of different strokes for different folks. But I know that there's a lot of workers who actually prefer to deliver with Relay because it's they know when they're working. They can sign up for 3 or 6 hour shifts. They get paid a little better. So I think, there's reasons to be optimistic that, you could have a different model that would actually work pretty well and wouldn't be some kind of dystopia in which, workers are getting squeezed, forced to work very specific hours and all, and so that's sort of my 2 cents on that.
Well, I think, this is going to go on, obviously. We'll bring you on again after March 11th for an update of what happened. Actually, we'll hold you to your predictions. But no, thank you for coming on, man. Much appreciated. If there's anything you want to add, please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Yeah, just say, follow those state campaigns that will be coming. I'm excited that Molde is coming on, and to drivers out there, I think the number one thing to do is just to be involved with any sort of local organizing in your area, your city, your state, because that's really the way to get these companies to listen, and to fight for whatever it is that you want to make this work good and to make this a good job that you can sustain yourself with, which is, I think, pretty basic. But so I would encourage that, and I certainly look forward to being back on at some point.
Well, thank you, Dan. Much appreciated. Here's Dan from NELP. If you guys have any questions, we'll put the link in the show notes. You can directly email them or go to their website and get your questions answered. Thank you, man. Much appreciated.
Thank you both. Enjoy the rest of the show.
All right, thanks, Dan. Have a good one.
All right, thanks for watching. That short little clip was from our live stream, Show Me the Money Club with Sergio and myself, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Make sure you subscribe, turn on all notifications so you'll be notified when we go live, as well as all of our awesome content. Make sure to check out this video right here, which will take you to the entire live stream, or check out this video right there. All right, drive smart, everyone.